Good morning, everybody. The 10,085th meeting of the Security Council is called to an order. As this is the first formal meeting of the Security Council this year, I should like to extend my warm wishes on the new year to all members of the Security Council, the United Nations, and the Secretariat. In presiding over this first formal meeting of the Council in 2026, I'm happy to welcome the new members, Bahrain, Colombia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Latvia, and Liberia. We look forward to their participation in the work of the Council. Their experience and wisdom will be invaluable assistance in the discharge of the Council's responsibility. I shall also take this opportunity to express the Council's gratitude to the outgoing members, namely Algeria, Guyana, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, and Slovenia, for their important contributions to the work of the Council during their terms. I shall also like to take this opportunity to pay tribute on behalf of the Council to His Excellency, Mr. Samuel Zobogar, a permanent representative of Slovenia, for his service as the President of the Council for the month of December. I'm sure I speak for all members of the Council in expressing deep appreciation to Ambassador Zobogar and his team for this great diplomatic skill with which they conducted the Council's business last month. The provisional agenda of this meeting is the threat to international peace and security. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Cuba, Eritrea, Islamic Republic of Iran, Mexico, Nicaragua, Paraguay, South Africa, Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, Uganda, and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to participate in this meeting. It's so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of the Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, the Undersecretary General for the Political and Peace-Building Affairs. Mr. Jeffrey Sachs, President of UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and Director of Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, and Ms. Mercedes de Freitas, Founder and Executive Director of Transparencia Venezuela. It's so decided. Security Council will now begin its consideration for item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I'm going to deliver a statement from Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is not able to be here this morning. Mr. President, members of the Security Council, we meet at a grave time following the 3 January United States military action in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The broad outlines of the events of Saturday have been widely reported. Early that day, U.S. forces were active across Caracas and in the northern states of Miranda, Aragua, and La Guaira. The extent of casualties resulting from these actions remains undetermined. In a statement on social media on Saturday, President Donald Trump announced the conduct of a, I quote, large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader President Nicolas Maduro, end quote. During a press conference on Saturday, President Trump stated, and I quote again, "We are going to run the country until such time that we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition," end quote. The government of Venezuela has characterized the United States' action as a military aggression carried out in civilian and military areas and as a flagrant violation of the Charter, posing a threat to international and regional peace and security. As we speak, President Maduro is being held in New York, accused by U.S. authorities, along with his wife, Celia Flores, of serious criminal offenses. What is less certain is the immediate future of Venezuela. I am deeply concerned about the possible intensification of the instability in the country, the potential impact on the region, and the precedent it may set for how relations between and among states are conducted. Mr. President, the situation in Venezuela has been a matter of regional and international concern for many years now. Attention on the country only grew following the contested presidential elections in July 2024. The panel of electoral experts I appointed at the Venezuelan government's request to accompany the elections highlighted serious issues. We have consistently called for the full transparency and the complete publication of the results of the elections. As reported to the Council on 23 December, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has cataloged serious violations. On 3 January, Venezuelan interim President Delcy Rodriguez invoked an emergency decree throughout the national territory, extending additional security powers to the government.
A partir de agora,
The
vamos
latest developments
trazer
follow
uma
a
tradução
period of heightened
simultânea da
tension
reunião
beginning in August,
que
as
acontece
discussed
na
in this
ONU. Quem está
council on
falando
the two
é a
previous occasions.
secretária-geral da ONU.
I have consistently stressed the imperative of full respect by all for international law, including the Charter of the United
Em 13 de
Nations,
janeiro,
which provides
a
the foundation
presidente
maintenance of international
interina
peace
Delcy
and
Rodrigues
security.
convocou
I
uma reunião
remain deeply concerned
extraordinária,
that rules
estendendo
of law
os
have
poderes
not been respected with regard to the 3
dos
January
últimos
military
acontecimentos
action.
de altas
The Charter
tensões que
enshrines
começaram
the
no mês de
prohibition of
agosto.
the threat or use of force against the
Que
territorial
impulsionou
integrity
as
or political
intenções.
independence of any state. The
Preciso
maintenance
do
of
total
international peace
respeito
and security depends on the continued commitment
que
of all
pede
member
a
states to
independência
adhere to all
de
the
política e da
provisions of
paz
the Charter.
internacional.
Mr. President,
Permanecemos preocupados
Venezuela
com as
has
regras
experienced
do direito
decades of
internacional
internal
que não estão
instability
sendo
and social
respeitados
and
em
economic
relação
turmoil.
ao dia 13 de janeiro,
Democracy has been
quando
undermined.
aconteceu
Millions
a
of
ação
escapes
militar.
have fled the
A
country.
Carta da ONU
The situation is
proíbe
critical, but it is still possible to prevent a wider and more destructive conflagration. I call on all
a
Venezuelan
manutenção
actors
da
to
paz,
engage in an inclusive,
depende
democratic
dos
dialogue
Estados-membros
in which all sectors of
que estejam
society
sempre
can determine
aderindo,
their
precisam
future.
aderir
This
aí
entails the full respect
às
of human rights,
a
the rule
Carta
of
da
law,
ONU.
and the sovereign will of the Venezuelan people. I also urge Venezuela's
A
neighbors and
democracia
the international community
foi
more broadly
ameaçada,
to
milhões de
act
pessoas
in the
foram
spirit of
ameaçadas, mas ainda é
solidarity and in
possível prevenir
adherence to the
algo maior
principles,
e
laws,
mais
and rules
doloroso
erected to
na
promote
Venezuela.
peaceful
Pedimos aos
coexistence.
atores
I welcome
venezuelanos
and am
para
ready
que
to
se
support
engajem,
all efforts aimed at assisting Venezuelans in
os
finding a
principais, né,
peaceful way forward.
coexistentes na
Mr.
Venezuela,
President,
se engajem aí
Excellencies,
na luta a
in
favor da
situations
Venezuela.
as confused as
O
complex
Estado de
as the
Direito e
one we now
soberania
face, it is
precisa
important
prevalecer para
to
o
stick
povo
to
venezuelano.
principles.
Precisamos
Respect for the UN Charter and all other
pedir
applicable legal frameworks
para
to safeguard
o
peace
povo
and security. Respect for the principles of sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of states. The prohibition of the threat or use of force. The power of the law must prevail. International law contains tools to address issues such as illicit traffic in narcotics, disputes about resources, and human rights concerns. This is the route we need to take. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefings. I now give the floor to Mr. Jeffrey Sachs.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, the issue before the Council today is not the character of the government of Venezuela. The issue is whether any member state, by force, coercion, or economic strangulation, has the right to determine Venezuela's political future or to exercise control over its affairs. This question goes directly to Article 2, Section 4 of the United Nations Charter, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The Council must decide whether that prohibition is to be upheld or abandoned. Abandoning it would carry consequences of the gravest kind. Let me offer some background. Since 1947, the United States foreign policy has repeatedly employed force, covert action, and political manipulation to bring about regime change in other countries. This is a matter of carefully documented historical record. In her book, Covert Regime Change, political scientist Lindsay O'Rourke documents 70 attempted U.S. regime change operations between 1947 and 1989 alone. These practices did not end with the Cold War. Since 1989, major United States regime change operations undertaken without authorization by the Security Council have included, among the most consequential, Iraq 2003, Libya 2011, Syria beginning in 2011, Honduras 2009, Ukraine 2014, and Venezuela from 2002 onward. The methods employed are well established and well documented. They include open warfare, covert intelligence operations, instigation of unrest, support for armed groups, manipulation of mass and social media, bribery of military and civilian officials, targeted assassinations, false flag operations, and economic warfare. These measures are illegal under the UN Charter, and they typically result in ongoing violence, lethal conflict, political instability, and deep suffering of the civilian population. The recent U.S. record with respect to Venezuela is also clear. In April 2002, the U.S. knew of and approved an attempted coup against the government. In the 2010s, the United States funded civil society groups actively engaged in anti-government protests. When the government cracked down on the protests, the U.S. followed with a series of sanctions. In 2015, President Barack Obama declared Venezuela to be, and I quote, an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. In 2017, at a dinner with Latin American leaders on the margin of the UN General Assembly, President Trump openly discussed the option of the U.S. invading Venezuela to overthrow the government. During 2017 to 2020, the United States imposed sweeping sanctions on the state oil company PDVSA. Oil production fell by 75% from 2016 to 2020, and the real GDP per capita declined by 62%. The UN General Assembly has repeatedly voted overwhelmingly against such unilateral coercive measures. Under international law, only the Security Council has the authority to impose such measures. On the 23rd of January 2019, the United States unilaterally recognized Mr. Juan Guaido as interim president, and a few days later froze approximately $7 billion of Venezuelan sovereign assets held abroad.
De 2016 a 2020, o PIB real per capita do Brasil caiu 72%. A Assembleia Geral da ONU votou repetidamente contra os Estados Unidos sobre o direito internacional. Apenas o Conselho tem
operations in 7
poder.
countries, none of which were authorized by the UN Security Council, and none of which were undertaken in lawful self-defense under the Charter. The targeted countries include Iran, Iraq, Nigeria, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, and now Venezuela. In the past month, President Trump has issued direct threats against 6 UN member states, including Colombia, Denmark, Iran, Mexico, Nigeria, and of course, Venezuela.
No ano passado, os Estados Unidos
Members of the
bombardearam,
Council are not
fizeram
called upon to
bombardeio de
judge
7
Nicolas
países,
Maduro.
nenhum dos quais
They
foram
are not
autorizados
called
pelas
upon to
forças
assess whether
de
the
segurança,
recent
entre os
US
quais
attack
o
and
Irã,
ongoing
Iraque,
naval
Nigéria,
quarantine
Somália,
result in
México,
freedom or subjugation.
agora a
Members of
Venezuela.
the Council are
No
called
mês
upon to
passado,
defend
o
international
presidente
law,
Trump fez
specifically the UN Charter.
6 membros da
The
ONU,
realist school
o
of
Trump fez
international
ameaça.
relations, articulated most brilliantly by John
Colômbia, Venezuela, os
accurately
membros do
describes the
Conselho
condition of
não
international
foram
anarchy
convocados
as
para
a
julgar
great
Nicolás Maduro, não foram chamados para avaliar
therefore, a
se
description,
realmente
not a solution for peace. Its only conclusion is that
agem
anarchy
pela liberdade. Eles foram
In the
chamados
aftermath
para
of the
defender
war, the
o
League
direito
of
internacional,
Nations created to end the
especificamente
tragedy
a
through the
Carta da ONU.
application of international law.
A Escola Realista
If the world's
do
leading
Direito
nations failed
Internacional,
to implement
articulada
international law in
brilhantemente
the 1930s,
por John
leading
Menes
to
Heiger,
global war.
descreve a
The
condição
United Nations worked on that
internacional pela
catastrophe of
tragédia,
humanity,
como a
second break
tragédia internacional
place international
dos grandes
law
poderes.
above
O
international
realismo, portanto, é uma
In
restrição,
the words of the
não
Charter,
uma
the UN
solução.
was created,
A
quote, to save
conclusão
succeeding
leva
generations
à
from
tragédia.
the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime
Depois
has
da
brought
Primeira
untold
Guerra
sorrow to
Mundial, a
mankind.
Liga das Nações foram
Given that we
criadas
are in the nuclear
justamente para
age,
acabar com a
failure
tragédia
cannot be repeated.
e trazer aí
Humanity
o direito
perish. There will
internacional.
be no
E ela
third
foi
chance.
defendida
To fulfill its
aos partidos,
responsibilities under the Charter, the Security Council
aos países das
immediately
Nações Unidas, que
following
trouxe
actions.
a catástrofe da
The United
humanidade
States
após
should
a
immediately
Segunda
cease
Guerra
and
Mundial.
desist from all explicit and implicit threats
Essa
or use against
Esse
Venezuela.
destroço da guerra
The
traduz
United States shall terminate
que aconteceram
its naval
duas vezes na
policy
humanidade,
and all
levaram
related
todos
coercive
os
military
a
measures undertaken
grande
in the
perda,
absence of
dado
authorization by the UN
estamos
Security
na era nuclear. Essa
United
falha
States
não
shall
pode se
immediately
repetir.
withdraw
A
its military
humanidade
forces
não pode perecer.
in and
Não
along the
pode
border
haver
of
uma terceira
Venezuela,
chance. Para
including
cumprir
in
essas
naval,
responsabilidades sobre a
air,
Carta da
and
ONU,
other forward
o
deployed
Conselho da ONU deve
mission
imediatamente ajudar.
purposes.
Os Estados Unidos
Venezuela
devem
shall adhere to the UN
imediatamente
Charter
desistir
human rights
e
protected in
acabar
the
com
UN
todas as
Declaration
ameaças
of Human
de
Rights.
todos os países, com os usos das forças
Secretary
nos
General, I
Estados Unidos.
recommend,
Os
should
Estados
immediately appoint
Unidos devem
special
ficar
envoy
sob
mandated
quarentena
to engage
marinha
relevant
e todas
Venezuelan and international stakeholders and to
na
report
falta de
back to the
autorização
Security Council
da falta de
within
autorização da
14
ONU,
days
os Estados
with
Unidos
recommendations
devem imediatamente tirar suas
and the
forças
Security
militares
Council
de
should
todo o
remain
perímetro da
urgently seized
Venezuela
of this matter.
e
All
ativos
member
de
states should
inteligência,
refrain from
marinha,
unilateral threats,
aéreos
coercive measures, or
ou
armed
de coercitivos de qualquer modo.
undertaken
O
outside the
secretário,
authority
eu
of the
recomendo
UN Security Council.
que nós devemos indicar
In closing,
enviado
Mr.
especial
President and distinguished members of the
para
Council,
cuidar dos assuntos da
peace
Venezuela
and the
e todos
survival of
os
humanity
stakeholders
depend on whether
do
the
direito
United Nations
internacional para
Charter
trazer
remains the
o
living
Conselho
instrument of
de
international law
Segurança em
or is
14 dias
allowed to
aí.
wither into irrelevance.
Todos os Estados
That is the
membros
choice before this Council
devem
today.
evitar
Thank you very much.
qualquer tipo de ameaça
I
unilateral.
thank Mr. Sachs for his briefings. I now give the floor to Ms. Mercedes de Freitas.
Para encerrar, senhor presidente e os senhores membros do Conselho, a paz e a sobrevivência da humanidade dependem de se a Carta das Nações Unidas seja mantida viva no direito internacional, ou se ela pode ser violada. Muito obrigado.
My apology. I now give the floor to
A
Ms.
palavra
Mercedes
está com Mercedes
de
de
Freitas.
Freitas.
Good morning.
Bom dia.
I speak in Spanish.
Good morning, ambassadors, representatives of states and governments. Much for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Mercedes de Freitas é responsável
Can you hear
por
me?
várias operações e
Can you
paralisações.
hear me?
Mercedes de Freitas. Como tem sido todo o processo na Venezuela. Logo após a Mercedes de Freitas, todos os países vão se posicionar. Rússia e China são os próximos.
Buenos días, señor.
Muito obrigado por
Good
essa
morning,
oportunidade.
ambassadors, representatives of heads of state and government. Thank you to enable me to tell you something about Transparency Venezuela, the work that we have been doing. We have organized.
Bom dia, senhores embaixadores, representantes de estados. Muito obrigado por essa oportunidade de representar o estado das
Organized some information I'm going to
investigações
put
da
forward to you in 5
transparência
points.
pela transparência dos acontecimentos na Venezuela. Organizamos.
He
Continue.
organizado la información que me
I've arranged the information I'm going to give to you in around 5 points. Let me make the most of my time. First of all, one, the corruption in Venezuela is seen in 73 countries of the world. We have organized, we've seen hundreds of cases that we have documented over the years, more than 500, 600 cases in various countries.
Vamos ouvir a China, a Rússia, a Colômbia. A Colômbia que já pediu ajuda ao Brasil, né, já está aí pedindo trazer aí essa fala.
Solo en los sistemas de justicia.
We looked at the justice systems of 30 countries, and 172 cases were dealt with for corruption, and more than $72 trillion were involved. $1 million were involved. This was public Venezuelan money. Nicolas Maduro and his family. The interpreter cannot hear the speaker.
Ha sido el instrumento central, involucrada directa e indirectamente en el.
It was a system that was involved in 90% of the corruption cases. Point number 2, the national criminal organizations. The interpreter cannot hear the speech to provide sufficient interpretation. I apologize.
Soportar, proteger y dirigir las operaciones ilícitas. Las economías ilícitas de oro, extorsión y trata de personas alcanzaron en 2024 $8.000 billones.
Can you hear us? Ms. Freitas?
De la producción de oro, ¿sí?
Can you hear us? The interpreters cannot hear you. Can you slow down and raise your voice a little bit?
Hay un delay.
There's a delay, says the speaker. The problem the interpreter is having is with the quality of the sound, which is insufficient for interpretation. It's not the speed.
Sí, la oigo con delay.
I'm hearing you, but with a delay, says the speaker. I can hear you, though.
Please proceed now.
Ok, perfeito.
Agora o presidente pediu para Ms. Freitas falar mais devagar e mais alto para que os tradutores possam traduzir.
National and international criminal organizations
Eu tenho delay aqui, eu demoro pouco
have
para
a
ouvir.
symbiotic relationship with the regime of Nicolas Maduro, sharing capacity, using the state structures to facilitate their work and to protect illicit operations in gold, for example, drugs, extortion, and human trafficking. And according to our estimates, this accounts for about $8 billion. Gold, for example, only 20% is reported to the National Treasury. The rest goes to private accounts where there are members and allies with the government. This mining industry has exploited so many people using national parks and also the Amazon area. And then to launder the money from corruption, the network has money laundering structures that are very sophisticated. And since 2021, they've been involved in this work. 3, great corruption has led to a decrease in the income of the state and therefore public expenditure, and therefore affecting the quality of basic services. The current economy is in crisis. There's no money either to service the debt. And Venezuela has been in technical default since 2017. We owe more than $15 million. For Venezuelans have had to learn to live with just a few hours of electricity per day in very many parts of the country. And we've learned to protect ourselves from daily extortion from the armed Colombian groups or the organized crime groups, but also elements of the state. So many families only have one meal per day below the calories that they need, affecting their nutrition, which is getting worse day by day. Humanitarian programs are not sufficient. And then 5, there's no checks and balances between government departments. The government has captured all institutions, beginning with the justice institutions and also the oil company responsible for the majority of income for the country. In order to maintain control and the impunity of these illicit operations, a repressive system that's getting worse and worse is being applied. And to date, there are more than 1,000 political prisoners. At the end of the year, 26 people died during torture or because a lack of medical care. United Nations has documented many of these cases. We need a transparent state that is accountable, that will guarantee the rule of law and human rights, that will protect public goods for everyone without privilege, a system that's autonomous and independent. We need investment in building capacity that will enable us to have a dignified life. We must respect the will of the Venezuelan people to live in peace and democracy. And finally, a request to you: freedom for all political prisoners in the country. Thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Freitas for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Mr. President, Colombia would like to thank Somalia in your quality as President of the Security Council for having quickly responded to our request to convene this emergency meeting, as well as thanking China
Agora sim,
and
vão
Russia
começar os
for their
membros do
support
Conselho que
of this
vão
meeting.
fazer declarações.
And we assume
Primeiro vai ser
a
aí a
successful
Colômbia.
managing the work of the Council at a particularly delicate time for international peace and security. I'd also like to thank Undersecretary General for Political Affairs and Peace Building of the United Nations and the invited briefers. We thank them all for their briefings. This is the first time Colombia is taking the floor in the Security Council as a non-permanent member for the period 2026-2027. Colombia is taking on this responsibility with a deep sense of duty, and we are going to do this from the first day, defending international law and the purposes and principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter. International peace and security, the peaceful settlement of disputes, the prohibition of the use of force, sovereign equality, respect for the territorial integrity and political independence of all states. Colombia condemns categorically the events that occurred in the early morning of the 3rd of January in Venezuela, where we saw multiple explosions and air activity over Caracas and other areas of the country as part of a military attack carried out by the United States, which included bombings of civilian and
A Colômbia
military
condena categórica
creating panic amongst the population.
os acontecimentos da madrugada do dia 13 de janeiro
Violations of the
na Venezuela.
sovereignty, political independence, and the territorial integrity of Venezuela. There is no justification whatsoever under any circumstances for the unilateral use of force to commit an act of aggression. Such actions constitute a serious violation of international law and the United Nations
Isso
Charter,
representa uma evidente violação da soberania
prohibition on the use or the threat of
política
the
e a
use of force,
integridade territorial da
principle
Venezuela.
of the respect for
Não há
sovereignty and the
nenhuma
full authority
justificativa,
of states
nenhuma
over their
circunstância
territory, including
para
their
a ação
natural resources,
unilateral dos
the
Estados Unidos.
territorial integrity of states,
Todas
and
as
the
ações
principles of collective defense,
é uma grave
particularly
violação do
when
direito
they
internacional,
directly endanger the
incluindo
population
a
and
proibição
civilian assets.
do uso da
Defending
força,
these principles
da
is not an
ameaça,
option. Indeed, it's a
ao
common
princípio do
obligation that we
respeito à
have in order
soberania
to
e
preserve
autoridade
international peace and
plena
security.
sobre
We need
seu
to
território,
remember that the provisions of the
incluindo
Charter
seus recursos naturais e
allow for the use of
integridade
force
territorial,
only under exceptional circumstances,
sobretudo
in legitimate defense in the
quando
face of an
coloca em
armed attack,
risco as
or when there
populações
is an express authorization by this
de
Council
bem de caráter
in
civil.
accordance with Chapter 7.
Os princípios
And
não é
even in
uma
those
opção
cases,
para
this does not
preservar
amount
a
to assuming
paz.
political control of another state. In this regard, we reject any
Precisamos
unilateral military action, any act that could worsen the situation or endanger the civilian population. And
ou quando existe autorização expressa do Conselho, de acordo do capítulo 7, em alguns casos, e não para assumir o controle político de outro Estado. Sendo assim, nós rechaçamos a ação militar unilateral dos Estados Unidos e que, colocando em risco a população civil, fazemos um chamado para a diminuição de temperatura, para que não se use a força, colocando em risco as pessoas que vivem uma situação delicada. Elas devem ser a prioridade absoluta. Nós já aprendemos com a nossa experiência que a população é que sempre paga o maior preço de um confronto armado. Senhor presidente, a América Latina sempre foi proclamada como uma zona de paz. Na nossa região devem ser respeitadas ações unilaterais, direito internacional, que colocam em risco, aumenta a insegurança e agravam as condições já conexas da população civil, com efeitos devastadores que ultrapassam as fronteiras soberanas de cada país, com impacto direto em países diretos, com países de outras da mesma região. Atendendo à necessidade eventual da população, principalmente a população imigrante, a Colômbia tem sido e seguirá a maior receptora do povo venezuelano diante da insegurança que apresenta a crise ocasionada por esses ataques significantes, com o avanço da imigração. A Colômbia continuará dando essa assistência aos venezuelanos. Senhores presidentes, essas ações nos fazem lembrar dos piores momentos aqui na América Latina. É uma zona de paz. E o compromisso como Estado que a Colômbia assume como Estado através do diálogo, do acordo, está estabelecido no direito internacional como instrumento no nível mundial e regional. A ONU, a Carta da ONU também, internacional de paz, isso não significa paz, isso não significa segurança internacional. Além da nossa região, como membro permanente do Conselho de Segurança, toma a decisão de assumir o controle unilateral de um Estado soberano, como se fosse um objeto, e de apropriar-se de recursos naturais da região. Isso deve ser profundamente preocupante para a ordem mundial. Estabelecido depois da Segunda Guerra Mundial, e isso é um flagrante delito internacional e destrói a Carta da ONU. Um Estado que é membro permanente desse Conselho, que desconhece a ordem desenhada que foi criada. Para que então esse Conselho? Onde estão a base da paz e da segurança internacional? Estamos aceitando que a lei dos mais fortes esteja sobrepondo todos os acordos que essa mesma que foi assinada aqui com diplomacia esteja sendo tomada por violência. Nem tampouco deve estar sujeita a interesses econômicos. A democracia só pode ser construída através de respeito e a vontade dos povos. A reafirmação do estado do diálogo, de processos pacíficos. A Venezuela merece viver em paz, com um governo soberano, definido pelo seu próprio povo, por suas instituições. É por isso que a Colômbia tem pedidos reiterados de pedidos junto com a Venezuela. O interesse primordial de ter a paz internacional e a proteção da vida e dos direitos dos irmãos devem prevalecer sobre qualquer. A Colômbia reitera que vai trabalhar incansavelmente sobre esses princípios, no seu novo papel como membro não permanente, e coloca à disposição seu trabalho para uma saída diplomática na crise atual do nosso país irmão. A Colômbia pede a esse Conselho que tenha a responsabilidade de manter o seu Conselho soberano, se ocupar com o assunto com calma, e nós agradecemos aí ao Conselho de Segurança da ONU e que ative os seus canais e devemos encontrar uma saída política. Para encerrar, pedimos às partes que exerçam a máxima cautela e contenção, que diminuam as tensões e aumente os diálogos, o diálogo
First and foremost, we wish
diplomático.
to congratulate you on your accession to the presidency of the Security Council. And second, we wish to welcome the newly elected members of the Security Council.
Muito obrigado, senhor presidente.
The beginning of this new year shocked all of those.
Falou a embaixadora da Colômbia, a Leonora. Não a justificativa que ela falou, não, a violência não é quem sai prejudicar são civis.
became key principles in the work of the new U.S.
A democracia não se
administration.
constrói com violência.
The
A Colômbia
assault
também se colocou
against the leader of Venezuela,
se colocou à
compounded by the
disposição
deaths
para
of
mediar o
dozens of
conflito.
Venezuelan
Agora, embaixadora da Rússia,
citizens, in the
Vasily
eyes of
Banzini,
many, become a harbinger
vamos ouvir.
of a turn back to the era of lawlessness and U.S. domination by force, chaos, and lawlessness, which continues to afflict dozens of states in various regions of the world. There is no and can be no justification for the crimes cynically perpetrated by the United States in Caracas. We firmly condemn the U.S. act of armed aggression against Venezuela in breach of all international legal norms. In connection with the confirmed reports about the presence of the abducted president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and his spouse in the United States, today, as we are aware, they are in New York, we call upon, corrects the speaker, the U.S. leadership to immediately release the legitimately elected president of an independent state and his spouse. Any problems existing or conflict between the United States and Venezuela need to be resolved through dialogue. And this is precisely what is enshrined in the UN Charter. But purposes and the principles which a number of states in recent years have begun to apply selectively, depending upon the political landscape. Today, we are reaping the consequences of their recklessness and selectivity in matters related to respect for the norms of international law, which were linked to the so-called rules-based world order. Here is your rules-based world order in all of its glory, which is horrifying even the staunchest Atlanticists. Mr. President, we extend our firm solidarity with the people of Venezuela in the face of the external aggression. We firmly support and completely support the policy of the Bolivarian government, which is geared towards protection of their national interests and the sovereignty of the country. Washington's aggressive acts have already been condemned by many states and multilateral associations, including the Non-Aligned Movement, the African Union, as well as a group of friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations. We hope that the international banditry will immediately be met with objective and comprehensive assessment at the international legal level with United Nations, universal mechanisms, and other multilateral formats being brought to bear. This process must not be impacted by the recognition or non-recognition by any given states or groups of states of the legitimacy of Nicolas Maduro. For this reason, unintelligible murmurings and attempts to avoid principled assessments by those who, in other circumstances, at the mouth and demand that others respect the UN Charter, today seem particularly hypocritical and unseemly. We hope you will recognize this, and we hope that you will abandon double standards and that you will not attempt to justify such an egregious act of aggression due to a fear of angering the American global gendarme, which is attempting to once again rear its head. We are particularly appalled by the unparalleled cynicism with which Washington did not even attempt to conceal the true aims of its criminal operation, namely the establishment of unbridled control over Venezuela's natural resources and the assertion of their hegemonical ambitions in Latin America. In this way, Washington is generating fresh momentum for neocolonialism and for imperialism, which were repeatedly